Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I hope everyone is doing alright. This morning is still the morning. I had the opportunity of coming across an awesome clip. Now, this is sometimes Sam Seder, and first let me make sure everything is ticking along smoothly. By the way, if you enjoy what I'm putting down, please feel free to support the show. You know they've demonetized the channel at this point, so anything that's done on this channel is done through your own contributions. There is a link at the top. As opposed to giving through Super Chat, you have the opportunity to click a link in the description box. That link is essentially the link at the top. Or you can give through Patreon or PayPal. Both of those things would be absolutely appreciated. Sam Seder. Now, Sam Seder sometimes is on my list of making fun or taking shots at Sam Seder, but I've said on more than one occasion that he is in my sandbox and risk or approach Sam Seder cautiously. I would say it that way. I understand that people may disagree with Sam Seder on a lot of the stuff he says, especially since he's more so in the camp of more of establishment types. But I gotta be honest, I could watch Sam Seder for hours, go through Libertarians. There is hours of footage where Sam Seder eviscerates and eats Libertarians alive. And it is some of the best watching on YouTube, bar none. If you're a lefty, you have nothing to do one night, put on Sam Seder going through Libertarians, and it's a list of them. They would call into the show, each thinking that they're making a really good point, and all of them getting eaten alive. In this case, we have a professional libertarian, Walter Block. He's a professor, and he's a libertarian. He's both. Now, he calls in to give Sam Seder a talking to, saying he must have heard that there were a lot of other of his ilk that were being eaten alive and embarrassed on radio, or on YouTube, or in some cases both. And he has come on to defend the integrity of libertarianism and make the argument about laissez-faire capitalism. He gets eaten alive. Now, there is something that these guys are talking about, that Sam Seder and this guy is arguing about, but I want to nail down what they're arguing about, because sometimes people miss the crux of what's being said over the words that are being used to say it, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Let's take a look at this. I'm not going to show the entirety of this, but good job, Sam Seder. Kudos to Sam Seder. He ate him alive. And the guy's a rageaholic. So at a certain point, the guy starts screaming at Sam Seder to shut up. I don't know if we're going to get that far into it. I might do the second part of this. But he needs meds. He needs medication. And he gets humiliated. Let's take a look at this. Look, he gets humiliated on two fronts. I don't think the argument works. And in a secondary point, you're losing your shit. You're losing your shit. In an embarrassing way. Sam Seder kicking ass.
E. Block, he is the Harold E. Worth Eminent Scholar, Endowed Chair, and Professor of Economics at the Joseph A. Butt College of Business at Loyola University in New Orleans. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Sam, thanks.
In exchanging emails, you've asked me to do my best not to interrupt, and that we won't interrupt each other. And within the confines of the medium, I will endeavor to do so. And we agreed to start with the premise of
laissez-faire capitalism.
why don't we start? Yes, why don't we start with the laissez-faire capitalism is the best system for mankind, both from an ethical and an economic point of view. So tell us why that is the case.
Well, just briefly, what laissez-faire capitalism is a voluntary trade between consenting adults. And every time a voluntary trade occurs, for example, if I trade my pen for your wristwatch, it must be that there's something about your wristwatch I like better than my pen, and there's something about my pen that you like better than your wristwatch. And therefore, there's mutual gain, at least in the ex ante sense of anticipations. Ex post, one of us may regret the trade later, but at least in the initial
By the way, I just want to add something. Sam Seder gives a master class in arguing here. And I gotta be honest, when you're looking at how to do something, whether it's chess, whether it's, I would imagine, anything, you look at certain, and you use certain, I guess you can say, techniques that replicate themselves over and over again. When Sam Seder argues a libertarian, I don't know if he does this intentionally. I don't know if he does this just as a way in which he argues. He puts on a master class on this, and I'm going to point out certain things as it goes along. First, explain yourself. There is no such thing as everything being solid all the way around. There's no way you can devote resources to everything at the exact same time, meaning there's some areas of weakness in any particular thing that somebody does. Meaning you can have any world you'd want, providing you're willing to deal with the consequences of that world. The same thing is true of an argument. So, what is your premise? He gives a premise. Great. Explain your premise. And as he explains his premise, he gets down a rabbit hole, in which case he needs to defend, and it may not necessarily be one of the strongest points. That is indeed the point that Sam Seder punches him in. So let's keep going. Sam Seder gets him to explain his premise and let him walk down the hole.
So outset, we are trading because we each expect to benefit. And this applies to barter and to buying and selling and renting and employment and every other contract, investing in the market system. So it's mutually beneficial, and this is sort of a deontological proof of it, namely the logic. There's a lot of empirical evidence that attests to the fact that the countries that are closest to laissez-faire capitalism, namely have the most economic freedom, are also the richest. For example, Hong Kong and Singapore in the empirical analyses are the most free countries in the world, and they're among the richest. And from an ethical point of view, it's also beneficial because it's based on voluntarism, no coercion. If anyone pulls a gun on anyone else and forces him or compels him or prohibits him from doing anything in a commercial interaction, well, then that would be outside of laissez-faire capitalism. So what's inside laissez-faire capitalism is just voluntary interaction, and voluntary interaction is ethical.
Now, is it your sense that we don't have that type of a freedom to engage in exchange in this country?
Well, we've got some. When I first did my empirical research, I think the first book was 1976, the U.S. was the fourth freest country. We're now, I think, something like the 15th or 16th freest country, which is pretty good out of, 150 or 200 countries, but, not as good as it could be. So we've got a modicum of economic freedom, although it is...
The problem with this conversation, and I'm going to tell you in advance, and I may skip through some of it, he's so long-winded. And I understand that people are looking at me like, what the fuck, how is Jamarl saying that somebody else is long-winded? He's long-winded in answering a question. So I ask a question, the person answers, and it muddles along, and muddles along, and muddles along, and muddles along. You're on a radio show. What am I going to do? People don't want to hear you muddle along and muddle along. They want to get to, this is a yes or no. Is this what you believe? Yes or no? You're not giving me long answers. Part of the reason that Seder has to interrupt him is because they're on a radio show and the guy is muddling along as opposed to kind of really getting to the crux of what Seder is trying to get at. So I may skip along in what this guy's saying only to get to the point of, I guess my point is I'm not chopping him up intentionally. It's just because he's saying the same thing. But I'm going to let him make his point. But you'll see what I mean when I say muddle along, and it gets a little bit more animated.
Curtailed in many different ways.
So let's talk about how it's curtailed in your perspective.
Well, for example, take the minimum wage law. That curtails it in the sense that I now offer you a job washing my car or whatever at $6 an hour, and let's say you would agree, and we can both go to jail for that. They probably wouldn't put you in jail because they would think I was exploiting you, but theoretically we could both go to jail because the minimum wage law is $7.25 an hour, and if we two consenting adults come to an agreement for $6 an hour, it's illegal. So our freedom to have an employment contract is, in that instance, curtailed.
And so how is that, how is the idea that I would get, I mean, when we talk about the minimum wage, the idea that I would get a living wage or a wage that could sustain me, how is that unethical, A, and how does it hurt us economically?
Well, I mean, let's say $20 an hour is sustainable, or what did you call it? I forget.
A living wage.
Living wage. Sorry. Let's say $20 an hour is a living wage, and I'm offering you $6. Have I hurt you? Have I, in any sense, engaged in uninvited border crossing? Have I used coercion against you? No. I've not worsened your position. I don't know what your situation is right now. In hypothetical, I'm not talking about you as an actual person, rather you as a theoretical person. I come up to you and say, hey, come work for me for $6. What do you say? And, you know, if you can make $20 an hour a living wage, well, you say, well, thanks for your offer, but no thanks, if you're a polite person. If you're not polite, you'll say something else. On the other hand, if right now your wage is, say, $2 an hour, you'll say, whoop-de-doo, $6, that's great. So I think that either I can't hurt you, or possibly I can help you. Now, it would be nice if you were making $20 an hour, and if you were, then my offer of $6 will just sort of flow off your back like water off a duck's back. You're not going to seriously entertain it. But I haven't hurt you, I haven't violated your rights, and I might have improved your situation if your situation was much more dire, namely, say you were making $2 an hour, or you were unemployed and had no other job opening. $6 an hour is better than nothing.
All right. The battle lines are drawn. The battle lines have been drawn. This is a hill now that's been clarified. This started off as laissez-faire capitalism as being the greatest system on the planet. This has gone into the rabbit hole of minimum wage. And I guarantee you, having a conversation among working people, this is a conversation that Sam Seder is willing to have. And this is a conversation that the ordinary person looking at this, who realizes that to some degree they're talking about him and the wage that they get this applies to. Now, I guess I love, this is always fascinating to me because it's, you start off at one high level thing and you drill down into the bits. At the end of this argument, what people aren't going to remember, you know, the whole entirety of it, they're going to remember who won this. But whether you won it or not, is really being boiled down into the narrow confines of the minimum wage. The entirety of this argument started off as whether laissez-faire capitalism is the greatest thing on the planet. Argument is always fascinating to me because it always loses, like, an argument about minimum wage in no way answers that question or can answer that question. And even though the assumption is that if you're arguing about this thing and if one loses this point, the overarching point is somehow lost. It's fascinating, that's all. Let's keep going because I want him to go into this. Seder is right. From my perspective, Seder is right. But I want to explain why I think Seder is right. And you can make your own point on it.
Well, now let's talk about the...
Oh, and by the way, the original question is unanswerable. It's only the greatest in comparison to something, you know, depending on what you want. You can't answer that question unless you nail that down into specifics. What do you mean? It's the greatest system in relation to what? If you mean it's the greatest system if you're trying to make capital production, maybe. If it's for human wellness, maybe not. That's a hard question to answer, and it purely depends on what you care about. But whatever. These guys are getting into something a little bit more solid about the minimum wage. And there's a philosophical point here that I want to hit at. This seems such like a mundane conversation, but there's gravity to it.
So living people. I mean, when we talk about actual individuals, we know that in many instances, if you're making even, let's say, the minimum wage as it is now, never mind getting rid of it, many of those people cannot afford to feed their families without government assistance. They can't afford to get health care without government assistance. You know, we're all well aware of, you know, the stories of how many Walmart workers are required to get nutritional assistance and medical assistance. We also know that in the case of, you know, I mean, so I'm not sure how it's unethical that someone would receive a higher minimum wage. But also from an economic standpoint, we know that just there was a report today that I saw that raising the minimum wage will actually put an additional $35 billion. I mean, specifically when we're talking about the $10.10 an hour, it'll increase the wages of almost 29 million workers by $35 billion, and it will increase economic activity. How is that bad for the economy, and how is that unethical?
Well, I think it's bad for the economy because right now, let's say there's somebody who's making $9 an hour. Right now, the minimum wage law is $7.25, and we're now contemplating, say, raising it to $10.10.
Right.
Right. And right now, there's some guy who's making $9 an hour, let's say. And the reason he's being paid $9 an hour is because his employer thinks he's worth $9 an hour. And probably that's what his productivity is, because if his productivity were less than $9 an hour, let's say $8 an hour, the employer would lose $1 an hour off of him, so he wouldn't hire him if he was only worth $8. And if he were really worth, say, $9.50, his wage would tend to rise to $9.50 because some other employer would offer $9.01 and someone else would offer $9.02. So in economics, we have this, I don't know, axiom or aphorism or something that says that wages tend to equal marginal revenue product or productivity. So here's a guy who's now making $9 an hour, and let's say his productivity is $9 an hour, and now we raise the minimum wage to 10.
You know, this is weird on a few points. He's assuming that all jobs have a fixed amount of value on a person. That's nonsense. There are plenty of jobs where there's soft values. An engineer doesn't necessarily maximize a company's productivity just right off the bat of buying an engineer. There's certain things. Hey, maybe this button looks better. Maybe this button feels better. Maybe this particular image looks more pleasing to the eye. There are all sorts of reasons that people hire people. Secondary, some of that stuff is chosen by the employer. The employer has a vested interest in making sure the employer wants to maximize his own profit, meaning that the amount that he pays somebody is always going to be less than what the person is bringing into the company, because otherwise the employee doesn't get his cut. I guess I'm saying he's acting as acting as if things that are subjective are somehow solid items. And all of this is from the perspective of the capitalist that wants to essentially hire somebody or pay somebody a lower wage. But let's keep going. I think Seder may be picking up on something similar than I am on this.
And now the employer says to himself, hey, this guy, Joe, who I used to hire at $9, now I have to pay him $10.10. I'm going to lose $1.10 off of him. I'm going to fire him. So that wouldn't be good for that guy because he loses his job. And
Seder has already told him that research has shown that when you raise the minimum wage, especially at certain margins, like, don't get me wrong, if you say we're going to have a $50 minimum wage, yeah, all these people are going to lose their jobs because a job may not necessarily be able to bear a $50 minimum wage. But can a person who has a $9 bear $10? Yes, there may be some people that lose their job, but you're also going to increase the wages of a huge swath of people in a society. And that money is going to be dumped back into the society. Yes, in an individual level, there may be some people that lose out, but there are more that gain. That's the point. He completely ignored what Seder just told him on that as he continues on this idea of, this one guy is going to lose his job. Let's keep going. I want him to make his point. I don't want to step on his point.
Now we have to twiddle his thumbs.
Well, Professor, but that doesn't necessarily follow, because we haven't, when we have raised the minimum wage, we have real world examples of this dynamic where we have raised the minimum wage in states. There are plenty of states in the country where it's actually higher than 7.25, and when it goes up, there's no measurable job loss. We also know that relative to productivity, the minimum wage in this country has not kept up with rises in productivity, yet we have had stagnant wages. So how is that explained by your theory?
Yeah, exactly. Because it has nothing to do with his theory. You have somebody who's able to make a large swath of cash off the people who they're employed, and they're able to take that cash for themselves. They're expropriating the wealth. Now, from an individual level, at a person who has a small business, a mom and pop, that mom and pop may not be able to keep that person. Fair enough. But that's on an individual level. We're talking about a measurable degree across a society, across a state, across a city. It's better for the whole. And it dumps more money into the society because you've just given more people more cash. He wants to keep on this point. Apparently he misses this point. You have a theory. We're talking about real world phenomena and real world experience. Yes, I agree with you. On an individual basis, there may be some people that lose out. On a whole, however, you have a society that gains. Let's keep going. There's more. There's something more awesome here that I want to get to, that I want him to get to.
Well, it's probably my theory.
Well, the theory you're espousing.
Right. I wish I could claim originality. This is like a mainstream economic theory.
Not so mainstream, but okay. But nevertheless, the theory you're espousing.
Well, yes. The theory I'm espousing says that when you raise their jobs. So the empirical stuff, you have to be very careful with that. I would say that of all empirical work on this question, maybe 95% of all the empirical work shows that if you wait a long enough time for adjustments to occur, there is very serious deleterious employment effects.
Well, wait now.
The problem is, though, that if you wait too long, then other things happen. So the empirical stuff is very iffy. Anyone can prove anything he wants by just the timing of when he takes the.
But even in your example, you're talking about when we're talking about laborers in the context of Walmart, let's say, or in McDonald's, there may not be an automation solution. But even within the context of your example, you're not saying that there's a problem with the minimum wage. You're saying that there may be a certain point where an increase in the minimum wage, in your case, it was the example that you gave was almost was nearly, I guess, 75%. Maybe there is a point between 40 and 70 cents an hour where it doesn't become effective. I mean, in other words, your example there does not in any way disprove, it does not necessarily mean that it's going to create job loss. It just means that at 70 cents an hour for elevator operators, it could have impact down the road. But I mean, if we're not going to, here's what's problematic is that your theory is nice, but my theory is that if you give more money into the hands of those people who are living at the lowest rung of the economic ladder, they're going to spend it. It's going to necessarily create more economic activity, and it's going to necessarily create more jobs because demand, as much as, Bob or whoever it was in that first example, the bottom line is I hire people when I have more business.
Right there. Right there. That's reality. That's just reality. I am doing a company here, right here, with this. This is a little small business, a little engine that could. And at a certain point, I'd say, damn it, I want somebody to cut my videos. Great. How much is it worth to me to get somebody to cut my videos? Fact is, the only way I can get somebody to cut my videos, the only way I can even think about purchasing somebody to cut my videos is if there's enough revenue coming in order for me to pay for the person to do it. Like, that's Sam Seder's point. If you're putting more money into the hands of the bottom rung of the society, they spend it. They have a reason to spend it. The guy who's barely making ends meet, who's getting minimum wage, you up his wage. What is he going to do with the money? What is he going to do with the money? You think he's just going to dump it in the bank, or are you going to spend it? Research shows they spend it. Research shows they spend it. And that's just not research, that's fucking reality. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Let's keep going. He's going to keep arguing about this. He made a point about the elevator man. That a hotel has an elevator man, and that guy stands there, and he takes the elevator up and down, and they increase the minimum wage, and you have to fire the elevator man. At a certain point, because they fire the elevator man, they put in a computer. The computer and the robot goes up and down as opposed to the elevator man. Great. And he's like, Well, you got the elevator man fired because you increased the minimum wage. Sam Seder's point in this is, but you're not disproving what I'm saying. Maybe there's a point in which the elevator man doesn't get fired, in which we increase the wage. Maybe it's not $20 an hour, maybe it's $15 an hour. And beyond that, if you look at productivity and amount, look, the point is reality disagrees with the guy that Sam Seder's arguing with here. What's his name? Walter Block. Let's keep going.
And if I got more business coming through, I'm willing to take that dollar hit on that guy I'm paying $9. If I've got 25% more demand coming in, I can not only pay for that, but I'm actually going to have increased profits.
Hello, you faded out.
I'm sorry.
Sam?
Yeah, are you there?
It's like dead air now. You're not speaking, and I don't know what's happening.
Oh, let me. Can you hear me, Professor?
Now I can hear you, but there was like a 10-second dead silence right in the
sorry,
middle, like you were cut off or something.
Well, what I was saying was that that in my example, in my theory, the more money you put in the hands of people who will spend it immediately, which are people who are making the minimum wage or less than the minimum wage, it's going to increase economic activity. It's going to increase demand. And that's gonna be the driving force behind whether or not I hire more people.
Right. Well, I tend to disagree with that. I think that what you're conflating or confusing or bringing together, which shouldn't be brought together, is when the minimum wage law rises, that people will actually be paid more. And it's not just a matter of technology, although technology is a way of substituting away. I remember when I was a kid, I would drive into a filling station and I'd be attacked by about 5 people. One of them would put the gas in for me, one would check the oil, one would do the windshields, one would do, check.
I hope you get his point. His point is, look, if you pay people $2 an hour, you have more jobs. Well, yeah, you have more jobs because you're paying people $2 an hour. The question is, can people live off $2 an hour? Now, Seders, and at this point he's like, hey, you could pay people less, and so you had all of these people attacking my car. Isn't capitalism great? You can pay people $2 an hour, and yes, if I could pay a videographer $1 to do a video, I'm pretty sure, you know what I mean? You get his point. They're looking at this in 2 different ways, even though they're looking at the same thing in an odd way. His argument is this is a bar for entry from the standpoint of creating jobs. If I can get if I can pay people very, very small amounts, then people or employers would be more willing to create jobs at those amounts. If I could pay somebody $1 to shine my shoes, then I might be inclined to get my shoes shine at $1. However, I am not willing to pay somebody to shine my shoes at $5. Well, in his mind, it's, well, hey, if we just allow the minimum wage to be $1, we'll have more people shining shoes. Sam Seder's point is, well, why are we allowing people to create jobs if those jobs can't allow those people to support their lives? In fact, I'm going to let them get to the argument because it gets more clarified, and I want them to clarify it. I don't want to clarify it.
The battery or whatever. And what happened is because of the minimum wage, we had a lot of self-serves. So it need not be technology, but those jobs are gone. And now what you have is what your theory says is that if the minimum wage rises to a moderate level, maybe not 40 to 70 cents, but maybe 40 to 50 cents or something like that, and maybe not $7.25 to $20 an hour, but $7.25 to $10 an hour, what you're saying is, well, then the people will get more money. But I'm saying the minimum wage law doesn't require that anyone get a job at a higher wage. It just says that if they get a job, then they have to be paid that, but they don't have to get that job.
No, I understand.
Now take this guy who's now his productivity is $9 an hour. His productivity isn't going to change if the minimum wage law goes to 10.10 and nothing else happens. He's going to be fired. How soon he'll be fired is an empirical issue. He might not be fired the next day, but he's going to be fired because his productivity didn't rise. And to pay him 10.10 when he's only worth 9, you lose $1.10.
Well,
and if you do it,
to use this example,
and if you keep, didn't we say we weren't going to?
I know, but you've made the point.
Am I going on too long?
No. I think we all understand the example of the elevator operator. But my point is that we're simply arguing theories here. You won't accept empiricism because you says that we really.
This is not a theory. This guy's arguing with reality. It is reality where a bump in the minimum wage increases the amount of money that people spend. They have more money in their pocket. Look, let's make it plain, and let me explain what I mean when I say make it plain. His point is this: it's the argument of the capitalist. I want to be able to pay people as less as I can possibly pay people because it allows me to maximize my profit. And in paying people as less that I can pay people, hey, you'll get the benefit of having more jobs. Ain't that great? Now, Seders' point is, look, if you can't pay people a decent wage, it's like if you're going to make a job, then you need to be able to pay people a decent wage. Now, the problem is, in our society, we have a capitalistic society. In that society, you have people who say, not only do we want companies to pay people a living wage, we don't want the government to get involved either. Meaning, they create a bar on the door. What this guy is arguing is ultimately for a bar on the door. They don't want government to get involved. So they don't want minimum wage laws. But they also don't want government making their own jobs. So they want to stop government and leave private enterprises being the only source or the only way for people to have a decent living. Because understand what he wants. He doesn't want the government to create jobs, nor does he want the government to create a minimum wage. He wants private enterprise to be the only source from which people can have a living. Because that's the crux of what he is making an argument for. Seders' point is, if you're a company, and if you want to have any level of interest in our society, if you want to have access to our roads, access to our military, access to our air, access to our electricity, if you want to be able to access the people in our culture, in our world, in our country, there's a minimum wage. There's a minimum way of getting into this point. That minimum is paying them a decent wage. At the very least, whatever that minimum wage is, they should be paid a decent wage. If anybody in this society decides that they want to work, they should get paid a decent wage for it. That decent wage is, can they have a living? That should be a minimum. I don't understand why this is even up for debate. His argument is, look, the capitalists don't want to pay people that wage. And they should be able to pay people less. And if you allow them to pay people less, you have more people working. What's the point of them working if them working is not going to allow them to make a living for themselves? Now, I look at this as being a pain in the ass on two fronts. This guy wants to pay people as little as humanly possible. And I would wager that this guy would also be against the government making jobs. Meaning if the government said, look, we're going to deal with issues of food deserts. So in the same way that we have the military, we're going to pay people to go to food deserts and buy abandoned buildings and create plant shelters in those buildings. Places where they would grow, I forget the name of it, herbivores or gardens in those buildings, farms, internal farms in those buildings where they can sell good quality food to people in those areas for cheap. Now they would say, how dare this guy? How dare you? We don't want the government doing that. We don't want the government paying people decent wages to do that, because if the government pays people decent wage to do that, then it makes people less inclined to take our shitty jobs. Of course, if you're working at McDonald's, you want to pay people shit and piss. Of course, if you're working at Walmart, meaning if you're an owner, you want to pay people shit and piss. Because the fact is, the way Jeff Bezos makes his $150 billion is that people are working in his companies making as little as possible. This is the argument of the capitalists. This is the argument of the capitalists. This is why these guys don't want government making jobs. Imagine for the moment if your government made a job and it was $15 an hour. Who would take a job working at McDonald's for $10? Who? if you had a situation where the government was creating jobs in this way. So I let him finish, but I'm going to end this. I want to get to the point where he starts screaming, because I think the point where he starts screaming is utterly hilarious.
Really can't measure this in the real world, is what you're suggesting.
No. I do accept empiricism. These are good illustrations. And my understanding of the economic literature on this is that about 95% of all empirical work show that there are very serious deleterious effects on unemployment. But much more important are the empirical studies are the logic of it. And you're not just, I don't think I'm getting across the logic of it.
No, I understand the logic of it, but I'm suggesting to you.
I don't think you understand the logic of it. You see, the logic of it that you're operating on is that the minimum wage law is like a floor. And as you raise it, the wages rise. Whereas the true account of the minimum wage is not at all a floor, rather it's a hurdle over which you have to jump in order to get a job in the first place.
This guy doesn't even understand that both of those things are true at the exact same time. He can't hold two thoughts in his head. I hope you get what I'm saying here. It's not either or, it's both. It is a floor and it is a hurdle depending upon the way you're looking at it. If you're looking at it from the standpoint of the capitalist, which is why I gave you both points of view. From the standpoint of the capitalist, I want to pay people as little as possible for doing a particular job because this allows me to make the most as I can possibly make and having my product as cheap as I can get my product. Labor costs. Now, in Sam's case, it's, well, no. If a person wants to work in this country, meaning if a corporation or if a business wants to open, then the floor, the very basic thing that they need to do is to be able to pay people a wage where those people can live. Just saying. Both are true. It's not one or the other, it's both. This guy doesn't know that. For whatever reason, he thinks it's just one. Look, I'm going to put this at the bottom. It's an interesting conversation. This guy starts screaming at a certain point because Sam Seder interrupts him. And Sam is interrupting him because, well, he gives these long-winded stories. And it doesn't really get to the point of what you're being asked. This is not tiddlywinks. This is not me just doing a video where I'm talking about a particular point and going on and on about it. This is a debate. The goal in the debate is to win. And this guy is droning on. So, but it was a good debate. Sam ate him alive. Sam ate him alive for that very point. In real world phenomena, what he's talking about is just not true. You up the minimum wage. And again, Sam's point is nobody's saying $50 minimum wage. What we are saying is that the amount, there's been a ton of productivity gains over the past 30, 40, 50 years. The amount of wealth has dramatically skyrocketed. Wages, real wages, have been flat. That wealth has been expropriated to the top 1%. That's my point. That's Sam Seder's point. That's the point and the position of the left. Full stop. Now, if he's making an argument that government shouldn't intrude, I think it's nonsense. The government needs to intrude. He's in a fantasy world. That's what I'm saying. And look, he is right about this. It's a floor to hiring people, but as a society, yeah, we want that floor, or he would say it's a bar of entry or floor. It just depends on the perspective that you're using to take it. If you are minimum wage or low wage, or if you're part of the 90%, it's a minimum wage. It's the least, it's the floor. If you're the capitalist class that wants to pay labor, or you're looking to pay as least amount as you could possibly pay for labor, then it's a hurdle. Just depends on what it is. Depends on what it is. Here's the catch. I am for government having decent jobs. I think government should have decent jobs. I think it's insane. If we invest in something as a government, we should get ends on those things that we invest in. I think it's nonsense that the government would invest in the internet and not get gains on the investment in the internet. Full stop. I think that's across the board. The government invests so much money. There's so much corporate welfare. Even if you want to talk about companies like Walmart, and let's talk about this in a different way. The argument against the minimum wage is often used for mom and pops, but I would wager that that argument is more so used against companies like Walmart. Walmart, let's be honest, is a multi-billion-dollar company. And you have people on Walmart, work there at Walmart, making on food stamps. The only way that Walmart could do that is if they're expropriating wealth in what they're doing. But they're forcing people onto governmental services when the company itself has more than enough money to pay their people a decent wage. Should we, the United States population, be paying for this company to be a multi-billion-dollar company? That's the question that you need to ask. Should you be paying for those people to be multimillionaires? If Walmart has the capacity to pay their people a decent wage, they should pay their people a decent wage. Full stop. Full stop. All right, let's see. Who's here? The logic of it. Libertarians are mostly pampered suburbanites who are ignores or unaware of the number of basic facts about human nature in order. I honestly have no idea how they lose one argument after the next. It makes no sense. It's get government out of the the process. There is no capitalism without government being a part of that process. Capitalism needs governments. I don't know how they factor that. Worker cooperatives are the answer. Agreed. Check out Moondragon Corporation. Timothy Jensen. Agreed. Soviet winter prison. You can't be a millionaire without a nearly unthinkable level of exploitation. Yes, very true. His argument is that people have some kind of fixed value that a company makes. All of this is subjective. That guy who's running that company is making an idea on how much that person is worth. There are times where that person is doing a specific job that you can quantify, but there are times where the person is not doing a specific job that you can quantify. In fact is, if you have a multi-billion-dollar corporation, how are you quantifying somebody on minimum wage? At that point, it's purely subjective. You, the person, is making a determination. And beyond that point, if it wasn't for those workers, you wouldn't have a company. Meaning the worker, the person who's in charge of the company, is making a subjective determination on how much somebody is worth. Missing the point that if it wasn't for the person working in the first place, that they wouldn't have a corporation. The subjective value that you're going to say that person is minimum wage misses the point that without that person working that quote-unquote minimum wage, you wouldn't have a corporation where that person is making millions of dollars. The entirety of the idea of it is somewhat suspect. But beyond that, my tax dollars shouldn't be going to help Jeff Bezos or the Walton family get billions of dollars. So I'm going to end it here. Good job, Sam Seder. Good job, Sam Seder. Let me make sure I haven't missed anybody. If anybody gave through Streamlabs. Guys, I know some people saying they've been having difficulties or they've been having trouble with PayPal. I'm sorry, with Patreon. PayPal is an alternative. All right, good. Didn't miss anybody. All right, guys, I'm going to end this here. I have more coming up for this evening. So if you enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through Patreon. Thanks, guys. Good job, Sam Seder. You kicked ass. Thanks, guys.